I am transgender. Growing up, it was scary. I didn't have anyone to talk to. My family didn't understand. It's a struggle to be real. Society, for some reason, doesn't want people to be real. I've come across a lot of transgender children in the world, and I want to do everything in my power to make sure that they don't go through the things that I went through. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter what you look like. It just matters, are you a good person? I want someone to know it's okay to be transgender. It's okay to discover that you're not transgender if you think you are. It's okay to be gender fluid. It's okay to be gender neutral. It's okay to be gender non-conforming. It's okay to be male. It's okay to be female. It's okay to be gay, straight, lesbian. It's okay. Just please be a good person. Be kind. Hello everyone, and welcome to this exciting new episode of Kelly's Quest. We're almost a month past the latest elections that we had here in Massachusetts where transgender rights were put up to a ballot question. And I haven't spoken to you since this all came about, but I want you to know that Massachusetts citizens did it. They upheld the rights of transgender people and said, you know what, people, go about your daily lives. My personal belief is that this would have never have happened in the state of Massachusetts without hardworking people and volunteers and people that were putting all of their heart and soul into a campaign to make it happen. And today I'm very fortunate that I have two people with me from the Yes on 3 campaign. I have with me Matt Wilder, who was one of the media point people from the campaign, and also Angela Dellara, which was also a media point person. And to the audience, these were the two people that kept saying, Kelly Jenkins, can you go here and do this for us? Kelly Jenkins, would you mind going here and doing this? And I actually took track of how many assignments you all sent me out on. 27.
That's it?
27 things. You would have thought it would have been a lot more based on how tired I was.
I think we could have had you do about probably 25 more, I think.
Exactly, exactly. But I wanted to introduce Matt and Angela. We're using Skype with Angela today, so she can't see Matt. Matt can see her on a large screen, so we're going to try to make this work, audience, so that we can have this full-on reunion, more or less. So I think the way that I want to start with this program is, first of all, Matt and Angela, just thank you for being here, and I hope that you have rested.
Well, I have, and it's great to see Angela again, because Angela, even though she's based in New York, we worked together so closely and had really through, at the very beginning, through the legislative process when this was going through the State House and becoming law. And so we worked together for really the last 3 years, day in and day out, so closely. And now it's all ended, and I haven't really seen her face in the last couple months, so good to see her again.
Aww.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Kelly. Nice to see you, Matt. I am so excited about this little reunion. I miss everyone in Massachusetts.
I have this hole inside of me now after the Yes on 3 campaign that I'm finding hard to fill, because one thing that I did notice from this campaign was family was built, and there was this camaraderie and a level of hope that was generated. How in the heck did this, you said 3 years ago you two started this, back in 2015 when they were first trying to pass the law in the first place and get it put on the books. And I remember that day when I heard that Massachusetts said transgender people deserve equal rights. And I remember the day that the law was passed, and then I remembered a week later that they had enough signatures to put it up for a repeal as a ballot question, it seemed like. So you're saying you all have been there since that point there?
Well, and Angela before that, so I'll let her speak to that. But, you know, our time together really started when it was really kind of intensifying on Beacon Hill back in the late spring, I guess it was the spring of 2015. When it really started to heat up and people started to take notice. But Angela's been working on this a lot longer than I have on this issue.
So Angela, you were there getting the law put into place in 2015 and 2016. What was that like? just to get that part of it started. And did you have an inkling of an idea that maybe that wasn't the end in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so I work for Freedom for All Americans, which is a national organization dedicated to winning LGBTQ non-discrimination protections nationwide. So Massachusetts was a really big priority for us. The history of LGBT rights in Massachusetts is pretty complicated and pretty long. We passed a bill in 2011 that included protections for LGBT people, including transgender people, in employment, education, credit, housing, but left out public accommodations protections for transgender people. So we decided in 2015 to go back and finish the job and update the law so that protections are complete for transgender residents. So as Matt said, in about summer 2015, my organization was one of the founding partners of Freedom Massachusetts. And we created a coalition of more than 1,000 organizations and influencers around the state who were dedicated to passing these protections in the legislature. And we met with lawmakers, we had transgender people testify, allies of the legislation testify, and we successfully passed that legislation in June 2016, and the governor signed it into law in July 2016. And then, unfortunately, opponents of the law collected a very small number of signatures that would force it onto the ballot 2 years later, November 2018. So that's sort of how we got here. And organizations like Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition, GLBTQ Advocates and Defenders, others have been working on LGBT rights in Massachusetts for decades. So we were able to sort of come together and build this amazing campaign to make sure that we upheld these rights.
So that's one thing that I want people to understand was this coalition was being put in place decades ago. You're saying that the groundwork of LGBTQ protections has been ongoing for a while. And as a transgender woman from East Tennessee, I didn't know that there was people out there in the world fighting for us like that. So when I moved up here to Massachusetts, I knew that there was like the Tennessee Transgender Political Coalition, but I knew that it was not weak, it had fantastic strategies, but it wasn't able to push legislation through that was protection. Mm-hmm. And so I thought it was a lost cause. And then I just thought, well, Massachusetts is just this way because there's this movement that's been happening without me knowing it. And then I come up here and I find out that for 20 years people have been busting their hind ends off doing this. And so the groundwork was already laid, is what I'm getting to. And then you all come along and just kind of steer it in a direction that it needs to go.
I think that's right. And I mean, I think another, obviously Massachusetts, the first state in the nation to legalize same-sex marriage. That was, I think, a proud moment for the Commonwealth. But when you look at specifically transgender non-discrimination protections, Massachusetts wasn't actually leading the pack. There are already, maybe 15, 16 states that already had these protections, and Massachusetts didn't. And that, I think, really created some momentum for people to begin to say, we should be leading on this, and it's not right that we haven't adopted these protections quite yet. And I think that helped.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I stumbled into this at the right time. I kind of feel like that the universe or whatever had me move up here in 2014 and gave me all these life experiences in Tennessee to bring them up here to use as storytelling. Mm-hmm. How in the heck did you all go find all of these storytellers? Because I know I wasn't the only person that you were sending out there. There had to be hundreds or thousands, possibly more. Can we talk about how you all got speakers and some of the things that you had these people do?
Yeah, I mean, I can start a little bit. We had really early on tried to identify people who were willing to really tell their story. And we knew we needed that as a critical component of this campaign because it's really what won the legislation in the first place. So when you look at Governor Charlie Baker, a Republican here in Massachusetts, when he first ran for governor, he was opposed to this legislation. And now fast forward, he adopted it, signed it, made it law, and then voted to uphold the law. That's quite the transition. There are Republican members of the legislature who stood up and said, I was wrong when I initially voted against this law. And the reason that they came around was because they met people like you, Kelly, and other people, families of transgender people who were willing to tell their stories, and they immediately had that really personal connection.
Right.
And that's really what made the difference. So we knew that was a critical component of this campaign. So Angela and I really worked hard to identify people, and in fact, that's how we met you. We set up these trainings all across the state, invited people who we thought would be interested in helping tell their story and win this campaign with us, to come and to learn about our messages that we knew were effective, and how to best tell your story. And ultimately, we met some really great people who did a lot of the legwork and really are the reason we are able to say we were victorious on election night.
It was huge. Angela, so you were out there finding all these people to speak also. How was it that, so you all were the point people. In other words, if a news outlet wanted to talk to somebody from the Yes on 3 campaign, they went through you and Matt. What was it like to get, I can only imagine how many phone calls you were getting a day from media outlets on this and other types of things. Can you just kind of give the audience an idea of what that was like?
Yeah, so of course, starting during the legislative session, we had been doing a lot of education with reporters, making sure they knew what this is really about, what being transgender means, what a public accommodation is. So we had been doing some of that relationship building for a while. So when we realized we were going to the ballot, as Matt said, we, really reached out to hundreds of spokespeople, transgender people, of course. Our number one priority was to introduce Massachusetts residents to transgender people and put a face to this issue. But we also knew that the burden shouldn't just be on transgender people to defend themselves. We need all of us to come together, allies, and people from all walks of life. So whenever we got a media request, we were really careful and intentional about who the best fit would be for it. We didn't want, to put any transgender people in a place that might be unsafe for them or that they, wouldn't be a good experience for them. So that was part of our strategy as well. But certainly by the time we were, 2 months out from the ballot question, we were getting a flood of media requests. We were submitting op-eds and letters to the editor, doing TV interviews. So really a huge combination of things and, a lot of work from a lot of different people.
Yeah, Angela, I think brings up a great point. Because this was a statewide ballot question, we couldn't just focus on the Boston media and go home.
Right.
Obviously the Boston Globe and the major television stations were a big part of it, but we also knew that those smaller regional newspapers were going to be just as influential in this as well. And quite honestly, public access television like Acton Public Access, those were critical outlets for us to reach voters at a very hyper-local level, to introduce them to their neighbors and their people in their community who are affected by this. One of our spokespeople, Jeannie Talbot, she's the mom of Nicole Talbot, a transgender teenager. She said something that really stuck with me throughout this campaign, which was that for the majority of residents of Massachusetts, this law would never have an impact on them. But for those who it did impact, it really meant the world. And so I think that was an important message that people needed to hear, and ultimately I think it was probably one of the reasons that we won.
You mentioned the mother, Jeannie. Having adults and children spokespeople, that has to even make it more powerful, I would think. And for these parents, I have to be honest, for these parents and these children to go out there, like you were saying, you didn't want to put any transgender people in a place where they didn't feel safe. You were very good with me about that. You would ask me, Kelly, are you okay with this one? Like you all asked me to put an op-ed into the Wellesley Townsman, and your first thing was, is this too close to home? And at this point, I'm like, no, everything is home, so let's make it happen. But to have these parents and these children working together with each other, I saw hearts and minds being changed at all these events. And for you all to make people feel safe enough and comfortable enough, because I was very hesitant about just going out there and blathering away at radio stations, like in live TV, and you all made me feel so at ease and so prepared for it that I can only imagine that that part of it also helped more people to go speak as well. How did you all, were there any, I'm sure there had to be uncomfortable situations where, because we weren't out there in a vacuum where everybody was like, yes on 3, let's vote for transgender people's rights. There also had to be adversarial media outlets out there that you all were engaged with, or with adversarial opponents possibly. Can we kind of talk about the strategy that we used whenever we were communicating directly with the No on 3 campaign or with opponents of it? Because my strategy was just to use logic and science and tell my story, but as cisgender people, you can't tell your story as transgender people, so I'm imagining that you all used other techniques. How did you keep calm? I guess would be my main one, and this is to either one of you.
Well, I'm happy to start. I think that, there obviously are outlets that were not as welcoming or open-minded to this issue, and I think, my strategy there was really just to engage with them. I felt, even though perhaps they were not our target audience, we really were looking at those people who were on the fence, who could go either way. I still thought it was important for people who may be a little bit further, to the no side of this, to understand where we were coming from and to understand our position. And so I always took the opportunity to respond to those questions when we got them. In the cases where we felt as though the audience really, probably, a lot of it was about thinking who would resonate best with each audience, as Angela alluded to. And so, one of the people who really became a really important spokesperson for us was Paul Tucker, State Representative Paul Tucker, former Salem police chief. He just had a credibility about him, having come from that law enforcement background, and being able to talk about and really knock down that safety argument that the no side tried to kind of use as propaganda for their side. And I think he just added some credibility for an audience that probably needed that. And so that was part of our strategy as well. And I think, Angela, as you mentioned, just did a great job of really working with our spokespeople to prepare them for what was coming their way. Angela really was the expert in the lead, because she's done this so often nationally, preparing people for those responses and understanding how the answers would be communicated or received by different audiences.
So the campaign itself, Angela, you all did a lot of work, and did you come across any sticky situations? That the reason I'm asking these is because there's going to be other people in the U.S. that these same type of battles are going to be happening, so I'm trying to give them ideas of what they will face, and also what we did when we had to face those.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like you pointed out, highlighting the stories of transgender youth we found was so powerful, because it really defied people's notions of what it meant to be transgender or their stereotypes. But we were really intentional in talking to these families and talking to their parents and explaining what that meant. We had a really brave transgender teenager named Ian tell his story for the first time in an ad that went statewide on this ballot question. And that, was the result of a lot of conversations with the family about what to expect, about keeping their social media accounts private, about how to keep themselves safe, knowing that not everyone was going to be supportive. And the family said, I think we're really lucky that we're in a place where, we're comfortable doing this, and we feel okay with Ian, being public in this way. And that wasn't true for all of them. They didn't do a lot of other media requests, because that's just not what they were comfortable with. But doing the ad was a place where they felt that they could help. So everyone had different levels of comfort and safety and concerns, and we really tried to find something for everyone. There were families that, realized they couldn't be public in that way, so they helped out, behind the scenes, and it did things that are just as important. So we also had, a policy of not sharing people's last names, not sharing their hometowns. And so we had some sort of rules that we stuck by when we were highlighting people's stories online and things, along those lines. So there are definitely ways and best practices that we can keep people safe.
It worked. I mean, from what I can tell, like I was only ever at one campaign or one voter forum where there was a no on 3 and a yes on 3 person. And the no on 3 side could not stand up to the logic of the audience and the questions of the audience. And it became apparent, and this was late October as everything was heating up, that there was a momentum on our side. And when I saw that, when I visually saw an audience of people support the yes on 3 side and say to the no on 3 side, you're wrong, it was powerful for me. But for the person that was a yes on 3 representative for that, to see the audience do that for her, it changed her life.
Yeah.
It absolutely changed her life to see an audience stand up for her like that in the heat of that. And that kind of brings me to one last little thing before we move on. The concept of inoculation. That was a scary concept to try to do, and I think it worked. So could you all kind of explain that this was something that I had never heard of in a campaign before. So could you kind of explain what inoculation is and how we used it with the Yes on 3 campaign? And I'll let either one of you discuss that.
Well, inoculation was really part of our field strategy. And what that meant was when we went and knocked on a door and talked to a voter one-on-one, we would bring an iPad or a tablet and show them some of the messages and some of the ads that they may expect to hear from our opponents, and explain to them why it was just not truthful and wasn't being forthright. And so it really was a strategy that was intended to show them the messages that would be coming their way, explain why they weren't being honest, and really underscore what this ballot question was truly about, which was dignity and respect for transgender people.
Right.
And so, I think it really was effective for us. It was happening for a long time, many, many months on this campaign, part of our field program, and I think was a very big key to our success.
So it was involved with it for close to 3 months or so, like that, like you all were doing this. How long was the...
Oh, that was happening much longer. The field program was in operation for well over a year.
Wow. So I don't know if you know the inside workings or not, Angela, but do you happen to know some of the numbers of exactly how large the Yes on 3 campaign was and exactly what we did put together? When I say we, I was a little bitty, tiny speck of a person that was driving over Massachusetts talking, but there was a gazillion tiny specks of people driving over Massachusetts talking and knocking on doors. And what did we create? I guess, can you explain to the audience what actually was created?
Yeah, absolutely. This was the biggest campaign of its kind on transgender rights in U.S. history. We've never built a campaign of this size before. We had over 100,000 conversations with voters by the end of the campaign, knocking on their doors, calling them, and talking to them about what this ballot question means. We had 70 staff, about, I would say, 25 of whom are transgender and non-binary. And of course, we really value transgender leadership. The campaign was governed by 2 transgender co-chairs. We had an executive committee of whom about half of the members were transgender. So we wanted to make sure, the community that's being affected by this ballot question obviously is at the forefront. We also had a huge volunteer base. We engaged more than 4,000 volunteers by the end of the campaign. So it wasn't just paid staff, it was really a grassroots effort of people who cared about this.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really big operation, and I think we were fortunate to have people who are willing to spend their time, their resources, their energy. I mean, you have a full-time job. We've got families who are, moms and dads who are, raising their families, working full-time jobs, and then doing this on top. And so we really just benefited from having an army of people that the no side just didn't have, that were willing to go knock on doors or make phone calls or go do media interviews on the South Shore when you live on the North Shore or whatever. It really worked, and we wouldn't have been successful without it, that's for sure.
You said earlier that the Yes on 3 campaign was co-chaired by 2 transgender people, and that's Casey Suffredini and Mason Dunn. I think they deserve a lot of credit. I've had Mason on one of my shows before talking about this, and I think that's the thing that I got from this. The most powerful thing that I got from this is that A, I'm not alone at all. I'm not even close to being alone. And B, we created, and I keep saying we because I do feel I was a part of it, a movement that I personally feel can be taken to Tennessee and go change Tennessee, can be taken to Kentucky and go change. I think that the idea and the passion and the logistics that you all created and managed and maintained can be taken on the road. Is there aspirations with this? Or I'm sure there's always things going on. But are there aspirations for this going to other states now, and how is that happening?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So certainly there's still about 30 states that don't have explicit protections for LGBT people from discrimination. So there are a number of other states where Freedom for All Americans is working this year. Certainly, trying to win by ballot measure is not something that we really want to do. We didn't ask for this fight in Massachusetts. We don't think that basic protections should be voted on because that's, no one's rights should be voted on. That's our view. But certainly educating people about this and passing these protections in the legislature is important. In New York, where I live, we don't have explicit protections for transgender people from discrimination right now. We have an executive order that the governor put in place for public employees. But New York is actually on our list of doing something similar and going back and updating the law and making sure that these protections are codified in the legislature and can't be taken away when a new governor is elected. So that's one place where we'll be working. Florida, Texas, Georgia, these are all states that have LGBT advocates on the ground that have been working for a long time that just don't, haven't been able to pass these protections yet. And I think definitely we've learned a lot in this campaign about how to, show the dignity and humanity of who transgender people are, about how to tackle these myths head on and directly, and show that all of us care about the same things and have the same values, and we all have more in common than we don't. So I think there are so many lessons that we'll be taking with us to other states. And I think when you think about the federal level and the message that the administration is sending right now, it even furthers the urgency of statewide protections.
Yeah, it made me go get my passport, this current federal government. I went and got my passport just in case. I mean, I hate to think that way. But so if you ever need me to tell a good story for you all somewhere, I'm still willing to volunteer. If you need someone to come down in New York and tell a story, I'm there. Matt, Angela, thank you all so much for every single thing you have done from the very beginning 3 years ago before I met you to what's happening tonight. And I feel honored, and I'm very, very, very lucky to have met you all. And thank you for helping me and the rest of the transgender people of Massachusetts maintain and keep our rights and uphold our dignity.
Well, I would say,
Thank
Kelly,
you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm so proud to call you a friend. You're amazing.
No, thanks, Angela.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I echo what Angela said, but also, we, I think, would not have been as successful as we were without your commitment to this cause, Kelly. You really did drive anywhere we asked you to go in Massachusetts, sometimes at the very last minute, and it really did make a difference because we were able to reach voters that our opponents just weren't able to reach.
Well, thank you. And everybody out there, here's the proof that you can go change the world and go do good in it. And thank you for being an audience and listening to Kelly's Quest. Angela and Matt, thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time with another episode. Bye.